For almost a decade, I've buried myself in psychology books and I try to apply what I've learned to figure out what makes people tick. But unlike academics or media figures, I despise corporate talk. I know that memorizing Wikipedia phrases makes you look smart, but to me, psychology is a tool. It is supposed to help you gain clarity and solve real problems, and not get you even more confused, right? So in this video, I've picked the most practical lessons that will save you over 1000 hours of relentless studying. It will give you a massive unfair advantage because while others are blind to the games being played around them, you will understand the hidden rules. Sometimes you will be able to see the entire board, and that will often put you 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But nothing will work if you're falling for the biggest trap of the modern world. The idea that we are apex predators made of glass. If you look around, you will notice that many people are obsessed with being damaged, and honestly, it's not their fault for feeling this way. You see, modern society has convinced us to look at ourselves as fragile. They forget that humans are highly resilient, adaptable creatures. You know, it's not a coincidence that not only did we manage to climb to the top of the food chain, but we also got out of it. Our ancestors had to deal with saber tigers, famine, volcanoes, earthquakes, and all sorts of big dangers. Yet we are taught to look at everyday setbacks or even massive failures as life-ending tragedies. This is intentional because by convincing us that we are weak, it has made it incredibly easy for them to keep us obedient and make more money from us. However, if you truly believe in yourself and fight to get stronger and smarter, you still have to face the venomous envy of the crowd. Once you start becoming successful, you will have people in your corner, people who genuinely appreciate the effort that you have to put in. They look at your drive and ambition as a good thing. They know that those are the necessary traits to push humanity forward. But then you have the crowd. They will try to convince you that having power makes you more greedy and even evil, and they will loudly claim that being poor and harmless automatically makes you virtuous. People who are too terrified or simply unable to gain power will never admit it. Instead, they attack you. They pretend to do it out of having high moral standards, but in reality, their behavior is often driven by pure envy. That's why if you are ambitious and want to achieve great things, you must never apologize for it. You must never allow the hesitation that comes from the fear of what others will say to stop you. But it's not just about envy. If you look closely at the moral crusaders, you will discover a twisted secret. The halo deception. This might sound weird, but be aware of the saint. You know who I'm talking about, the person who is always parading their flawless morals. It's like they make a full-time career out of looking pure, but as you probably guessed, the brighter the halo, the sharper the horns. When someone is secretly struggling with deeply messed up urges, their brain cannot accept it. They refuse to admit they even have a dark side, let alone deal with it. As a result, they create this obnoxious holier-than-thou persona to throw everyone, including themselves, off the scent. This is why these loud moral crusaders almost always have the most twisted internet search histories. So don't buy the fake mask and definitely don't let them make you feel inadequate. Just sit back, smile and wait. Sooner or later that mask is going to crack. And when it does, it will be a very interesting thing to witness. But while they are busy drowning in their feelings of inferiority, you need to understand a very liberating truth about your own mind. Which leads us to the danger of purity. Have you ever had a sudden random urge to stab a rude stranger or to slap a teacher or even a parent right in the face? Have you ever wanted to sleep with someone who is strictly forbidden, like the girlfriend of your friend? If you have, relax. You are not an evil person. For centuries, society and religion have systematically brainwashed us into feeling overwhelming guilt simply for having thoughts. Now sure, there are negative thoughts and feelings, but you don't have to act on them. There's no need to make a big fuss about it. The reality is that we have roughly 70,000 thoughts every single day, and the vast majority of them are completely out of our control, right? So does it make any logical sense to fight them? Does it make sense to torture yourself with guilt over a random misfire of neurons? Of course not. In fact, simply accepting that these dark thoughts and feelings exist is actually very healthy for you, because the less you fight them, the less likely you are to ever act on them. So you are finally free from guilt. But as you look around, you will realize that most people are terrified of standing alone. They desperately crave a tribe. But instead of putting in the hard work to build a real community, they use a cheat code to bond with each other. They form what I like to call the Unholy Alliances. We all know that a nation or a community is held together by shared values and shared history. No doubt about that, but there's another, much darker social glue. A glue that will keep any group together, even if the people inside it have massive differences. I am talking about shared hatred. It is such a powerful force that when groups or even countries don't have someone to hate, they will literally manufacture an enemy out of thin air. Now why does this happen? Because when you're busy fighting and hating another group, you overlook the stark differences. For example, you have the left, the Muslims, and the LGBTQ+ community forming a united front because they support Palestine, but also because they despise Israel, and deservingly so. Another example is the populist right and anti-war leftists, or the right and gay conservatives, LGB without the T. When you see these unholy alliances, understand that they share a common enemy. And if that enemy is somehow destroyed or vanishes, they will immediately remember why they hate each other. But before that happens, what do all sorts of massive alliances have in common? They are very loud, sometimes even violent, and they share the belief that they are changing the system, when in reality they are very often falling for the illusion of progress. Every ruthless government, every mega corporation uses the same playbook. They allow what I like to call controlled rebellions. Smart dictators know that you cannot oppress people non-stop, right? You have to let them blow off some steam, otherwise heads will eventually roll, including their own. So they let you march the streets, insult them on social media, and from time to time they throw a few corrupt politicians in jail or force them to resign. The ones who were stupid enough to get caught. Or if it's a corporation, they will fire a CEO, they will sack a few managers, issue a public apology, and donate it to whatever cause is trendy that week. Long story short, they will throw a symbolic bone to the masses. Does this mean that you should stop protesting or complaining? Of course not. If anything, you should be more vocal, more intense. But you also need to pay attention to how they respond. Don't bite the symbolic bone no matter how big it is. You need to keep fighting until there are actual structural changes. Okay, up until now we have exposed how society is trying to manipulate us. But if we want undeniable power, we have to do something really scary. We have to confront the sick games that we are currently playing that are sabotaging our success. The body's alibi. Have you ever noticed that when you have to do something you really hate, you suddenly get a splitting headache? Or your stomach mysteriously acts up right before a difficult situation? You probably tell yourself it's bad luck or bad takeout, and sure, sometimes it is, but more often than not, it is a biological exit strategy. Here's what is happening in the dark corners of your brain. You desperately want to get out of a commitment, but you are too polite to say no. So your unconscious mind will literally cause a physical issue just to give you a good excuse to bail. That's why the next time you're torn about whether to do something, I highly recommend that you make a firm choice. Either do it or don't do it. Try your best not to sit on the fence because, as you can see, it's not healthy. Another trap is the coward's shield. Most people think that laziness is simply a lack of energy or motivation, but more often than not, laziness is a highly calculated, cunning strategy to protect your pride. Think about it. If you actually try your absolute best and fail, you're forced to face the truth that you're not good enough. On the other hand, if you stay lazy and never try, then you can keep the illusion that you do have a lot of potential, but it's just that you don't put it to work. So laziness protects you from the sting of failure. But what happens when your other obvious flaws start catching up to you? You're either forced to make some radical changes, or you have to do some outstanding PR for yourself. And this leads us to the fake rebellion. Highly effective people are able to adapt to changing situations. But those who chronically fail do something entirely different. They take their worst traits and frame them as virtues. For example, if you're a coward, you get to call yourself cautious. If you're arrogant and nobody likes you, you get to tell yourself that you're a misunderstood genius. And if you're flat out lazy, you get to claim that you're refusing to participate in a corrupt system. Now this could be true. You might have legitimate reasons to feel that way. But again, more often than not, you're not fighting a noble rebellion. You're simply renaming your failures. And the tragedy is that you have actual great qualities, and your life could be amazingly different if you cultivated those qualities. But by being incredibly dishonest with yourself, you get stuck in this miserable loop. And speaking of fake rebellions, there is a type of persona who takes this illusion to the extreme. The reverse puppet. You definitely know this person. They reject every tradition, oppose every rule, and automatically hate everything that is popular. We can call them the professional contrarian. They love to parade around wearing the ultra-independent freethinkers badge. But true independence means looking at the facts and deciding for yourself, regardless of what the society thinks. The professional contrarian clearly doesn't do that. They haven't cultivated the ability to think for themselves. They look at what the authority figures are doing, and they blindly, predictably, do the exact opposite. Now look, if your entire identity requires a system to push against, you're not a rebel. Your behavior is still 100% dictated by the same authority that you claim to hate. So this kind of rebel is a loud, annoying fraud, but they are mostly harmless. The real danger, however, lies in the people who refuse to rebel out loud. The ones who swallow all of their toxic inferiority, perhaps coupled with innate issues, and let it rot in the dark corners of their mind for years and years until eventually the monster gets out. We have all seen it in the news. A quiet, seemingly normal person commits a massive fraud or mass murders. Society is always shocked. The media loves to claim that they just snapped, that it came completely out of nowhere. But it didn't. That event was never a sudden mistake. It was the final, terrifying result of a sick mindset that they have been hiding for years. Long before he actually committed the act, he was drowning in intense feelings of inferiority. And instead of trying to fix themselves as the rest of us do, they were convinced that the world was the problem. That he's just a victim surrounded by evil people who have stepped on him without mercy. So that final act of insanity is the logical conclusion of collecting a debt that he thinks the society or the victims owe them. This is what happens when someone decides to punish the outside world for their pain. But there is another devious form of revenge, one where you do not commit a horrendous crime against others, you commit it against yourself. The Fake Martyr. You know that it is a sin to hate your parents, your siblings, or even the authority figures in your life. So when you understandably resent them, what do? You repress the fuck out of it. However, we already know how this repressed rage turns people into fake saints or ticking time bombs. But there is a third possibility. Instead of confronting the people who wronged you, you unconsciously decide to blow up your own future. You throw away your talent, you sabotage your career, you destroy your relationships, you actively turn yourself into a walking disaster. The obvious question is, why? Why on earth would you do this to yourself? Because by being a complete failure, you become the living, breathing proof of what a terrible job they did raising you. You're weaponizing your own misery. You're using your ruined life as a giant, undeniable middle finger to your family or society. I know it's a sick game. It sounds unbelievable. But it actually happens, and is more common than you think. But driving off a cliff takes effort. What about the people who are too terrified to even take the steering wheel in the first place? They find a much easier escape route, and this leads us to the relief of being imprisoned. Have you ever wondered why so many people turn into rabid political or religious fanatics, or happily bow down to oppressive governments? You might call them brainwashed, and you would be right, but let's go a bit deeper here. They have secretly signed an invisible contract. You see, being an adult, being an independent thinker, is very scary for them. They cannot handle that burden. So what do? They eagerly surrender themselves to a movement, a leader, or an extreme ideology. They do this so they never have to think about complex things ever again. They blindly follow the doctrine because to them, being in a mental prison is much easier than taking responsibility. By the way, it's a similar reasoning for people addicted to alcohol or drugs. One of the main reasons why they use is because it helps them escape real life. The Toxicity Trap. You probably have a friend who is a very nice person but has this pesky habit of dating losers. Or you have watched hard-working people stay loyal to horrible bosses, and it makes you go crazy. You want to shake them. What the fuck are you doing? You deserve better. Now why does this happen? Usually it's because they were treated terribly in the past, either while growing up or by previous romantic partners. And because the abuse went on for a long time, they eventually accepted it as standard behavior. They are so wired for drama that a normal peaceful relationship feels weird to them. It makes them suspicious. Without even realizing it, they become a magnet for people who treat them like dirt. You know, in a sick, twisted way, being in a toxic relationship is the only thing that feels like home. But as frustrating as it is to watch someone stay in a toxic relationship, it doesn't even compare to dealing with a person whose entire identity is built on a house of cards. The Radioactive Ego. You have met people who will rather twist into a pretzel rather than admit that they made a simple mistake. It's maddening. Even though you give proof and strong arguments, they still insist that you are wrong and that it's not their fault. They behave this way because their identity is at stake. You see, for most of us, being wrong is not such a big deal. We accept it and move on. But for them, admitting they made a simple mistake will trigger a radioactive belief that they are stupid, defective, or fundamentally unworthy. So don't get mad at them. Simply try to understand where it's coming from and walk away. The try-hard curse. If you go to a party and try really hard to be funny or confident, you come off as awkward and desperate, right? Or if you get into bed and force yourself to fall asleep, you will lie wide awake staring at the ceiling. Happiness works the same way. You cannot pursue happiness, it must ensue. You must get rid of this habit of obsessing over what you are feeling at any given moment. And instead, you have to focus on the external world. Practically speaking, you solve complex problems, you connect deeply with other people, you experience nature, art or culture, you know everything that is beautiful, you carry a burden, you're responsible, you fight for something larger than yourself. You know, the idea is to stop obsessing over yourself and find ways to better connect with others and enjoy the beauty of the world. After all, the world is not just the darkness, it's not just a tragedy. There are amazing things as well. The Unbothered cheat code. When a coworker snaps at you, you get angry and think they are a toxic jerk. But when you snap at others, you did it because you are stressed, you had a terrible night's sleep, your kids were screaming. You know, the idea is that it's completely justified. Do you notice the double standard? We judge others by their permanent character, but we judge ourselves by our temporary circumstances. This is one of the main reasons why you get stressed and why you drown in unnecessary drama. You're taking things personally when most of the time the other person is just having a bad Tuesday. So if you want to be unbothered, give those people the same pass that you eagerly give yourself. It will really prevent a lot of unnecessary suffering. Killing your hero. We all idealize someone. A celebrity, an artist, a politician, or a brilliant entrepreneur. And that can be a great thing because it helps you work harder to reach their level. However, things get complicated for us when we try to copy them. The reason is that when you spend your life trying to copy that person, you end up overwriting your actual self without realizing it. You become a hollow imitation. So here's how you can fix it. When you start noticing differences in your thinking or you have traits that differ from your idols, don't sweep them under the rug. Don't automatically assume they are right and you are wrong. Instead, test your own way. If your hero preaches waking up at 4 AM, but you tend to do your best to work late at night, stay up late. If they handle problems by being bold or a little aggressive, but you are naturally a person who takes things slow and steady, then trust your methodical nature. You need to actively work to discover and let your natural self come out. In other words, to become powerful, you must commit psychological murder. You have to kill your idol. That's when you start becoming your own character. But you must be careful that you don't look for shortcuts as most people do, because as you are about to see, shortcuts are a big trap, which brings us to your final lesson, the hack illusion. When you're learning about psychology or any other complex subject, it's tempting to learn a bunch of cool tips and tricks. And while that is fun, tricks alone won't get you far, because what will happen once a situation doesn't go as planned? You are left like a fish out of water, right? That's why you need a different approach. You need to identify the core skills of that subject, and then you practice each of that skill until they become second nature. This way you can adapt to anything because you are not running a script. Your attention opens up too. When your mind isn't busy recalling the next line, it picks up on the subtle details about a person or a situation that everyone else misses. This will help you adapt to all sorts of situations because you are not relying on a script. Now, this sounds like a ton of repetitive work, but trust me, it actually saves you years. Thank you very much for watching. You got 1000 hours of psychology knowledge in one video, but if you want 10,000 hours of psychology knowledge, head over to socialos.courses and subscribe because I will post more advanced psychology guides. See you next time.